One of the reasons I like reviewing films is that it's a chance to be introspective. As a reviewer, I'm not too concerned with determining whether or not a film is objectively good or not, as that's not an area I'm arrogant enough to claim any authority on, and there are others who are better suited to determining such a thing, if it even exists. Also, objective quality doesn't really reflect a movie's true power to me, which is showcased in the connections it builds with an audience. Sure, measurable quality helps, but attachments are not universally shared, and that's what I find fascinating. How is it that I can watch something like Ferngully and find it to be pretty bland, whereas someone else can watch it and declare it to be one of their favorite movies ever? I'm far more interested in what you think about a movie versus a group of academics doing a detached evaluation. Listening to a personal critique of a film opens a window to let some humanity shine through. It lets me know more about you and the type of things you value. And Good Will Hunting is all about letting that inner human speak forth and having that govern your life versus playing to a crowd. I first saw Good Will Hunting at a very important point in my youth. I was just getting into watching different kinds of films beyond the big blockbusters and animated tales. But I was using those as inspirations for where to branch off to. What actors do I like that starred in other films? What great directors' works haven't I seen? And so on. Robin Williams was someone I always had fond feelings about, having been raised on Mrs. Doubtfire and Aladdin. And thanks to my parents getting a DVR, I started to look at his films more. Certain ones repelled off me, like Popeye, whereas films like Dead Poets Society really resonated with me. But Good Will Hunting is the one that spoke to me the most as I was trying to figure myself out and what I wanted. Of course I was drawn to Williams' Oscar-winning performance, but what hooked me was Will Hunting's personal conflict, living a safe and passive life versus a venturous and active one. Over the years, I've returned frequently to this film during the best and worst of times, less because it's stellar in every measurable sense, and more because of how it connected with me. The film started out as a class assignment for Matt Damon to write a one-act play. After getting started in the business, he asked Ben Affleck for his input, and the two worked hard to develop the script. At one point, it was a mix of dramatic character piece and action thriller, but when the duo sent the script out to executives, the late Rob Reiner suggested they simplify it and focus on either one or the other. Noted screenwriter William Goldman concurred, advising them to develop the interpersonal relationships and therapist storyline. Damon and Affleck continued to work with Castle Rock for some time, but the sticking point was that they wanted to star in the film. At that point, the only real breakthrough success from an unproven writer-actor in Hollywood was Sylvester Stallone with Rocky, and Castle Rock gave the pair an ultimatum to find another studio in 30 days to purchase the script, or they would be booted from the film and Castle Rock would make it their way. Affleck then reached out to Kevin Smith, who in turn recommended it to Harvey Weinstein, who became intrigued enough with the project to buy it. Damon and Affleck were starting to get more notice in Hollywood through other projects, but it was when Francis Ford Coppola told Robin Williams about Good Will Hunting and he signed on that the movie was off to the races. The film eventually garnered rave reviews, was nominated for 9 Oscars and took home 2, and was an important launching point for both Affleck and Damon to go on to have very successful careers. Will Hunting is a 20-year-old living in Boston. He spends life hanging around with his buddies and is a repeat delinquent, going from one job to the next. One day at his janitorial job at MIT, he finds a math problem written on a hallway chalkboard intended for graduate math students, and he solves it. The professor who wrote the problem is Fields Medal-winning Gerald Lambeau, who first thinks Will is a vandal. However, he soon discovers that Will is a self-taught mathematical genius who outclasses most every professional he knows. He gets the judge to drop some recent charges on Will on 2 conditions. The first is that Will works with Lambeau on mathematical problems and theories. The second is seeing a therapist. Will scoffs at the second notion and antagonizes just about every specialist he meets. That is, until Lambeau's old roommate Sean Maguire sees him and agrees to treat him. At the same time, Will starts to date a pre-med Harvard student named Skylar. All 3 are about to challenge Will in ways that he never thought possible and get him to figure out there are more opportunities for him to live a more fulfilling life if he will only have the courage to take them. This movie is a phenomenally tight, character-driven story. The basic plot and thematic conflict aren't exactly original, but this is a prime example I like to use about how a film can succeed. Originality is wonderfully appreciated, and there's too little of that in corporate filmmaking, but I think it's more important to be well executed, and this is a benchmark on how to do that. There's little grandstanding about the film and its approach. It's not trying to be more than perhaps a quiet reflection on life, using an underachieving protagonist to guide us through the 2-hour story. It's not aiming for visual artistry, grand eloquent speech-making, or pushing agendas. And each role is carefully constructed to have their own importance, but also to primarily support Will's story. It's a delightfully exhilarating movie to watch because it's not that complicated or hard to digest with substance. To quote the jazz master Charles Mingus, "Making the simple complicated is commonplace. Making the complicated simple, awesomely simple, that's creative." Will Hunting has constructed a decent mundane life around him. He has 3 friends that'll let him just be himself. He has a small 1-room apartment, moves from job to job via a parole officer, and teaches himself through books. Except he's not reading random fluff stories, he's reading highly regarded academic works. The only challenge in his life that he willfully encounters is an intellectual one, and it's not even a real challenge to him. There's no denying his genius, but he's just not interested in pursuing it professionally. Lambeau quickly recognizes the magnitude of potential Will has and is eager to see him make good on it. Yet Will is just not budging. He'll do the work to fulfill the requirements, but he's not becoming engaged. That's where the therapist comes into play. Lambeau comes to McGuire in desperation, hoping to create a crack in Will's emotional armor and see him flourish. Yet this act of desperation becomes an inspired choice. Sean and Will are a lot alike. Both come from South Boston, both have experience with abuse and abandonment, and Sean is also living a life of mundane routineness, motivated by the death of his wife. He lives in his own cocoon. As Will surmises, Sean is at the other end of the spectrum on the same graph of not living life to the fullest, being more burnt out than anything. What Will is missing is someone to challenge him, but not in an academic capacity like Lambeau. He needs someone to make him want to be better, a soulmate. Sean is one possible choice, but the other is Skylar. She falls in love with Will, but she's not content to live life day by day on the path of least resistance. She wants to take a leap of faith in their relationship, venture into the unknown, and see what's on the other side. Will is too terrified to make that leap, and so pushes her away. Will's defense mechanism can be traced back to his youth. He's an orphan who had no real loving parental relationship. His foster father abuses him and drives him into that emotional shell. Will come out enough to make friendships, but not enough to be vulnerable and exposed. As a result, he has no concept of what love is and what true love does for a person. We're accustomed to talking about multiple types of love in our daily lives, such as familial, friendly, or erotic. But the key similarity amongst them all is passion. Passion motivates and requires engagement, and Will has no passion. Towards the end of the film, Will gets a real wake-up call from his best friend Chucky. Chucky tells him that he's sitting on a winning lottery ticket, and that Will is doing himself a disservice living this kind of life. Importantly, he frames the argument around Will's selfishness, and that choosing to live below his potential is demeaning to others. If bricklaying or plumbing or janitorial work is what you can achieve or is your passion, then there is no shame or dishonor in that. But if you're throwing away opportunities and talents to live that type of life that doesn't suit the hand you're dealt with, then it's a waste. Will starts to try for more than that, accepting one of the jobs that Lambeau set up for him. But he quickly realizes that's not what he really wants. He decides to follow Sean's example and go see about a girl. He chooses to follow Skylar to California. That ending shot, by the way, is one of the best things about the movie. We don't need to see the reunion. We don't need to confirm that Will is rewarded for his leap of faith. Instead, we see him taking the chance, and that's how it should be. In our own lives, we don't know if the chances we take are going to be worth the risk, but fear of failure shouldn't hold us back from them. We will win or we will lose, but that's what life is about. and at least we've shown the courage to look at difficult situations in the eyes and say, I'll try. This is another reason why Sean is important in the film. He represents the same dilemma, but he's at the other end of life. He's played a big hand, and while he doesn't regret doing that, he thinks that's the best he's gonna get. In a moment of frustration, Will gets him to realize that once isn't enough. While you're alive and have time left, you should keep fighting. You keep playing the game. Hence, Sean's decision to get back out there at the end of the film. One of the big themes in this film is games of chance. Certainly poker comes up, but the two more prominent examples are the lottery and baseball. The lottery angle comes through Sean, who still gambles despite believing he's been dealt his only winning hand in life once before. I find this to be an interesting contradiction, and I think it shows us that deep down, Sean hopes that there's still more out there for him. But baseball is the more obvious of the two, and it's wonderfully integrated throughout. Will plays friendly no-stakes games with Chucky at the batting cages towards the beginning. A key break in Will's status quo in life happens after he attends a Little League game, and one of the most important scenes in the film revolves around a significant sports moment, Carlton Fisk's walk-off home run in the 1975 World Series. Also, that scene has overhead shots of the chairs set up like a baseball diamond. Brilliant. As you likely know about baseball, the player steps up to the plate and has a few chances to hit the ball. A number of situations could happen, but the game hinges on the outcomes of the chances from each of the players, regardless of their individual skill at batting. It cannot progress with the players sitting comfortably in the boxes, letting only their best teammates play. And neither can life progress without you taking chances. Will's chief defense mechanism is to sum up people and situations and criticize them. By being a bully, Will gets them to back down. But part of the point Sean makes in that wonderful scene at the park is that Will may be wicked smart, but he does not speak from experience. He's had no first-hand knowledge of many of the things he's talking about. It's not that he's exactly wrong, it's that the criticism is hollow and springs up as a way to keep people away. Sean calls it for what it is: bullshit. Will bullshits his way out of relationships in order to avoid opening up. What Will needs to learn is acceptance. Acceptance of the truth that the foster father abuse was not his fault. Acceptance that people love him in the truest sense. And acceptance that pushing people away is an understandable and sympathetic response to his trauma, but one that cannot continue. When I was young, my favorite scenes were the comedic levity bits. Now my favorite scenes are the discussions and confrontations. The best scenes are when people open up to each other and we see the conflict play out. This movie reminds me of the strength of dialogue. Some of the most powerful scenes in the film are the dialogue-heavy ones, such as the park scene or virtually any of the scenes in Sean's office. However, the film is intelligent with the use of non-dialogue as well. There are great moments where nothing is said for a good stretch of time. After the park scene, there's probably the better part of a minute that passes by without a word being said, which allows us to process what Sean has said. One of the early sessions with Will and Sean has them sit in a room for an hour without speaking. And when Skylar leaves for California after her confession of love over the phone, none of that departure has any spoken words over it. I think a lot of modern films need to learn that silence is golden. Dialogue is important and needs to happen for us to get an understanding of our characters, but it's equally important to let silence govern scenes and let the audience have a moment to work out their thoughts and feelings. Constant noise and a barrage of quick visuals can be detrimental to letting a film speak. There's plenty more that can be discussed about the movie's themes. For example, the class struggle illustrated by the higher academics unable to relate to the ground-level workers, or how women in the film represent the soul and that passion I talked about earlier. But I think we've done enough for now, so that hopefully you have a good sense for how rich I think this film is. If I wanted to write a 15 or 20 page review, I don't think that would be that much of a stretch. But overanalyzing is a thing, so let's shift gears and talk about the cast. Matt Damon possesses the right balance of tough exterior, fun-loving personality, and vulnerability for the role. Even if he hadn't written the script, I think he would have been the right person to play that character, and his Best Actor nomination is a testament to that talent. I'm a little more ambivalent towards Ben Affleck's Chucky, but I also think that's kind of the point. You need some real, down-to-earth human characters to ground this story. Chucky is the biggest cheerleader for Will and provides him a brotherly kind of love, but it's importantly one that doesn't ask much for him. Chucky would lay down in traffic or take a bullet for Will without question. That kind of friendship is appreciated, but if that's the only thing you're getting, if you don't have others that motivate you to be better, that kind of challenge a soulmate provides, then you're probably living in a rut, and Will deserves more than the rut. If you want characters that really shine, you've got 3 excellent ones here. This was my first real experience with Stellan Skarsgård as an actor, and I love seeing someone who was pushed into greatness with a genuine talent, and it serves as a cautionary tale for Will. If Will doesn't take control of his life, there are others who will misguidedly take away that control in pursuit of making sure genius is recognized. That's what Sean is warning Lambo about: manipulation. Lambo is like Will in the sense that he has intelligence but not wisdom. Lambo cannot understand why Will is dismissing the gifts when they would probably gain him greater fame and renowned status than Lambo could ever achieve. It's a subtler kind of antagonist. He's not a villain. Remember, he doesn't twist his mustache hatching schemes to ruin Will's life. Instead, he's the misguided father figure who cannot relate to Will where he needs it. But his intrusion into Will's world forces him to come to terms with his potential and take a stance on what direction he wants his life to take. Stellan is absolutely wonderful and is one of the more overlooked performances in the film. I need to give a shout out to Minnie Driver as Skylar as well. Her chemistry with Will is solid and the audience falls in love with her as Will does, as you would expect. Yet Driver brings an earnest sincerity to Skylar that I think few actresses could. She's fascinated by Will and genuinely wants to see him face his fears and excel. It's another great and overlooked performance here. Let's be real for a minute though. The reason these performances are overlooked is because of the towering achievement that is Robin Williams here. Sean was intentionally written for a movie star like Robert De Niro. Yet Robin's charming appeal and style of acting makes for a perfect marriage of actor to role. When you meet Sean, it's instantly like meeting an old friend and you immediately feel comfortable in his presence. Robin would have normally been too expensive for this type of film at the time, but he agreed to take a pay cut because, in his words, this movie's too good not to be made. Robin recognized that actors shouldn't be bigger than the material, and if the material is good, you have a choice to hold out for money or status, or you can be part of a project that you're really passionate about and believe should be made. That humble honesty from Robin is apparent in Sean to me, and I think of all the great performances he gave us, this is the one that most deserved recognition from the Academy. Thanks, Robin. You are one of the great talents of the last century in entertainment and are missed. A tip of the hat should also be given to Gus Van Sant's incredible direction and influence on the production, particularly in the editing, and for Danny Elfman's music. It's not a score that begs to be re-listened to, but it quietly matches the tone of the film and never feels intrusive. I also commend the inspired choice to collaborate with the late Elliott Smith on some of the songs. The filmmakers were looking for a raw kind of sound, and they were originally pushing towards more hard rock and roll. Instead, the acoustic and unpolished touch of Smith's musical style, I think, is a great sonic accompaniment to the film. And like most of the film's elements, it never seeks to stand apart from the story and characters and earn titles of its own. I think this is one of the notable qualities I've seen from the best movies. Each part works in tandem with the other. No part feels detached. They just fit together to serve the larger film. I don't really have much in the way of genuine criticism. The one nitpick I have is the excessive use of F-bombs. I'm not one for harsh language anyways, not that I can't handle it and don't sometimes use it myself, but at times it feels like the film is using the F-bomb in every other sentence. Matt Damon has said he wanted to portray how Boston youth really talk, and that he and Affleck would swear like sailors when writing the script. However, he has also reflected in introspective interviews that perhaps he went a touch overboard. I'm not disputing this is how college kids talk when they hang out. I've regularly heard worse at bars and parties. But when I've recommended this film in the past, I've gotten some pushback from people who can't get into the film because of the F-bombs. This isn't even kinda close to the most F-bombs in a movie I've seen, and I shudder to think what these people's reaction would be to things like Wolf of Wall Street or Uncut Gems. However, I think it stands out here because some of the lines and moments don't even really feel like they need the harsh language. There are films and stories that require that edge. If you've seen a David Mamet play, you'll know what I mean. Then again, you could argue that college kids talk like this partly because of the rebellious streak all of us had at some point. We're finally our own people who can do whatever we want. So naturally, we'll start saying all the things that would make our mom's hair turn white. There's truth in that argument, and so this really isn't that big of a deal. That's why I call it a nitpick. It's not a serious fault about the film, but if I had to point out an area where I'd personally make some changes, this would be it. In my life, I've gone years without people talking about Good Will Hunting in conversation. It's not a pop culture juggernaut, nor is it one of the great milestones of cinema, and I doubt many people would recognize me quoting lines from the film out of context. I'm not even arguing that it should be any of those things or any bigger than it already is. Instead, the humble and earnest honesty of the film and its execution makes it one of my favorite movies to rewatch and is something that has stayed on my mind ever since that first viewing. In a world that is oversaturated with overly commercialized films and vanity projects, it is such a breath of fresh air to go back to something focused and simple, without all the bells and whistles you'll see from modern Hollywood these days. For that reason, Good Will Hunting has secured a solid place as one of my favorite films, and I think it will continue to be so for a long time.